In the crucible of Myanmar's current distress, where the absence of legitimate sovereign has left an inevitable mark of suffering towards the people, the most ethical choice to help them is to cater a proper structure of governance that can bring back the stability of the nation, not by making the country a land of casualties by promoting war. So proud to stand under side proposition. Two things in my setup to crystallize the debate. First, let's establish the background of what has happened under status quo. A. The coup that has happened occurred because Junta have a very specific targets towards NLD, and that is the exact and only reason why they capture Aung San Suu Kyi. Understand that they did not detain Suu Kyi because they want to hate or harm Myanmar per se, but only because they have a very specified hatred towards the party because of the irregularities allegation in the 2020 election. And B. Junta has currently gained lesser and lesser power and have less control for most of its territory, especially with the rise of the People's Defense militant groups, where we see most of their troops have been ambushed by these fighters from these groups, right? They're aware of the fact that they're losing power constantly, and the response of this is that they want to hold an election to help them gain their power and autonomy back in Myanmar under the circumstances that NLD could not participate. What does this mean then? The nation's people have endured enough political, social, and economic upheaval where they're suffering every single day, necessitating a reliable governing body to provide stability, maintain law order, and to rebuild essential infrastructure. A stable government is vital to guide Myanmar towards a more promising future, and that is where proposition comes in hand. 2 points of framing then. 1, we would support the election to happen under the circumstance that we would conduct a supervision to make sure that it is conducted transparently and that it is in accordance with the democracy value that they claim they want to uphold. The United Nations and other countries would eventually be able to step in this supervision, as how we're aware the international eyes also have concerns towards Myanmar. So it is going to be monitored very tightly, and it is going to be likely when we support them, right? But secondly, our goal here is to rise up the democratic activity and political stability in Myanmar that we think is crucial for the people of Myanmar, not necessarily trying to hold a perfect, flawless, ideal election. So opposition cannot argue at some flaws that might have happened under government's election mechanisms, as we would trade that idea off, and at the end of the day, it is still going to be a way safer and worthy approach rather than arming them with weapons. Moving on to my substantive arguments then, I would like to talk about 3 things in my speech. Firstly then, how providing a material support and weapons under side opposition is going to harm the most vulnerable people. 2 layers. A. Notice that not everyone is opt into military, and we cannot assume that all of them are going to be able to just fight against Junta that is obviously very armed and trained for this. Sure, there are many militant groups that are on the rise, but notice that there will still be a lot of vulnerable people inside the country. Those that are poor, those that are dying, and those that desperately needs to be safe. And if a war occur, then most likely they would be the one that's impacted or basically died because of the lack of power. Not because they don't have weapons, but because they're unable to fight or utilize these weapons, or just simply because we cannot force anyone inside the country to just go into the war field when they're already very weak since the get-go. Opposition is very mean to do that. But B, we think under opposition, we're only going to escalate the tension in the war that already exists. Opposition might argue that, Junta is currently decreasing power anyway. Yet we believe if they see that Myanmar is being supplied by Western countries like what opposition would do, things would go far from ideal because of 3 reasons. First, Junta have dignity and aggressiveness that when they realize that the people have been backed up, most likely they're going to be way more offensive, more aggressive than ever, leading them to be extremely harsh towards the people, or for them to gain more and more weapons that it is very much unlikely for us to keep up. But secondly, if a war occurs, most likely a proxy war would also happen, because Junta would receive backup from China and Russia. Realize that China and Russia are currently still in good terms with Junta, as how they're also having the same anti-democracy value. Even China has traits and assets in the Junta area that they would not hesitate to back up Junta at all times. And if this proxy war happens, then we would probably lose, because realistically, their military backup power would outweigh all of the things that we try to cater. Also remembering the fact that we're trying to arm civilians here, not a highly trained military like what Junta have been all this time, right? Thirdly, as counterfactual of opposition, even if we would win against Junta, why do we think this is still not going to be worth it, right? Panels, even if you can shut down Junta completely, it'll be very painful and took so long to recover because of the damages for this war that has been happening is unimaginably disastrous. Look at how Libya is currently already supported by the US from their civil war back then in 2011. However, until now, they still have no president and is one of the poorest countries in the world. It is not worth it to support this military war. The premise of this argument is simple. We would only be oriented to protect these vulnerable people inside the countries, as we think how opposition is only going to worsen the situation by proposing an unrealistic idea of fighting back. Second argument then, this election under side proposition is the most strategic way if it actually wants to cater towards the people. Two layers as well. A, to implement a successful election where Junta would most likely have their interest of winning yet still maintaining the democracy values, they're going to be pushed in a way to grasp people's hearts because they want to be voted, right? This is going to be very impactful because notice that Junta probably already have a very demonized reputation in front of the people. And if they want to win the election, they would need to work really, really hard to cater towards the people's needs. This includes in them being less harsh and more caring towards the people. They would try to open more dialogue and connections with the people, for example. They would try to give helps, funding, or good contributions towards the people. Regardless of their intention, even if only for the sake of the election, it is still a good output for the people at the end of the day. But B, this election can really help to speed up the process of establishing a legitimate government, which we thing is super important for a better recovery, like I've mentioned in my framing, right? The idea here is that the people that we elect in this election are probably the ones who can better understand and meet the needs and wants of the people. When we have leaders who are elected by the people after all of these conditions and coups and chaos that has happened, they're in a good position to make policies and take action that directly addresses what the people really care about. This means they can quickly and effectively work on things like improving the economy, making life better for everyone, building better infrastructure, and other important things that we need for our recovery. 3 clarifications under side prop. First, if they say that there has been manipulations that have happened in the past and etc., we do not think that this would be the case, right? Because we do not think that Junta would win the elections, or at least want to win, since Myanmar people probably already really want their own justice after everything that I've been through, and they're probably already so fed up with Junta anyway, right? But secondly, we do not think that there will be any manipulations because we're also going to give transparency and monitoring as the United States and the United Nations as how a tight monitoring would still exist, like what I've explained in my model, right? But thirdly, even if under the worst case scenario, Junta would still win, 2 things. First, principally it is a valid result because it is a valid election anyway, and so the people's vote must be validated regardless. But secondly, we would take the bullet and say that we should let Junta have the power and try to trust them. This is okay because notice that unlike back then, when they're still very aggressive because they want to take down NLD, now that their main target is taken down and they cannot participate, they also did not have any agendas to harm Myanmar whatsoever, so we should learn to stop to demonize them, right? The premise of this argument is simple. 1, we would drive Junta to cater towards the peoples more that are currently the most vulnerable, and second, we would make a direct impact to bring back Myanmar's legitimacy as a nation. Third argument then, why do we think an election without NLD is okay? A, there's still tons of other parties that actually wants to accommodate democracy value but does not have the power yet, maybe because they're so overshadowed by NLD all these times, and now they finally have an opportunity to shine and show the people that NLD is not the only one. This is going to create a very dynamic and active political activity where it's not stagnant and is contingent on one party, leading to identity politics and whatnot. B, we don't think that it's worthy to glorify NLD so much. Look at how NLD isn't even that sensitive to some humanitarian issues, i.e. have them being very ignorant towards the Rohingya people back in the days, where it's clearly a very vulnerable case inside the country, right? We do not think it is worth it to pull NLT back to represent the Myanmar people so bad. NLT also isn't just democratic, right? But they're trying to create a political dynasty where every election would side with NLT at the end. So it is not as pure and it is as worth it to be protected. But see, even if we're being looked at mean or unideal because we exclude NLT from this election, we think we would trade it off rather than sacrificing the people. It is okay not to have a perfect election since it is a first and there are a better hierarchy that are at stakes under status quo, and we're still learning as a democratic country anyway, right? And for those reasons, we're very, very proud to propose.